The crystal of the chandelier above me seemed to cry tears of light upon a world to which I would never belong. I was sitting in an isolated chair, in the most discreet corner of a ballroom that cost more than my entire house, a universe of silk and champagne in the heart of Miami. My fingers, thick and marked by decades of bleach and mops, nervously smoothed the simple fabric of the dress I had sewn especially for the occasion, a humble cotton stain in an ocean of high fashion. It was the wedding of my only son, the boy to whom I dedicated every drop of sweat and every sleepless night. And, for a brief moment, I allowed myself to dream that all this luxury could mean that he had finally succeeded in life, and that a little of that sparkle might perhaps splash onto me. But then, my daughter-in-law, Amanda, a woman sculpted from marble and contempt, took the microphone. Her smile was a thin, polished blade. Her eyes, cold as the jewels on her neck, swept the room, passing over politicians and heirs until they found me, huddled in my corner. Her voice, amplified by the speakers, echoed like a sentence. I thank everyone who came, people of our level. And of course we have the groom's mother, a reminder of where he came from, but not where we are going. She is our family shame, but today we will tolerate her. The murmuring ceased. The clinking of cutlery stopped. A heavy, deafening silence fell over the hall, and every pair of eyes turned to me. I searched for my son's face, my boy, who stood beside her, as stiff as a statue. He did not look at me. He just stared into space, his face pale, a complicit partner in his paralysis. In that instant, the sound of my heart breaking was the only thing I could hear, and it was at the epicenter of this humiliating silence, under the weight of hundreds of judging stares and the cowardly abandonment of my own blood, that something inside me, a strength I didn't know I possessed, began to rise from the ashes of my pain. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I made a decision. There, in that plastic chair disguised with a ribbon bow, I understood that the love I had given would not save me. So, I would save myself. If you love Jesus and believe this story has something to teach us, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes of Stories of Healing and Wisdom. Your subscription is an act of faith in your own transformation. I ask you to join our community of souls who have gone through something similar. The silence that followed Amanda's words was not empty. It was dense, heavy, filled with invisible thorns that pierced my skin. Each second stretched into a painful eternity. I lifted my chin slightly, forcing myself to face the crowd that was analyzing me, as if I were an exotic and unwanted piece in a high society museum. I saw the morbid curiosity in the eyes of some, the polite discomfort in others, and in many, a vague contempt that confirmed my daughter-in-law's words. I did not belong there. My son David remained motionless, a wax groom next to his ice bride. The expensive suit I had helped pay for with countless hours of overtime seemed like a costume he wore to hide the boy I had raised. He was no longer mine. He was her accessory, a conquered trophy whose humble origins needed to be polished or, as in that moment, publicly discarded. The scent of gardenias and the floral arrangements, once so pleasant, now suffocated me, mingling with a metallic odor of humiliation that seemed to emanate from me. Amanda, for her part, maintained her victorious smile, savoring the power she had just demonstrated. She had not only married the cleaning lady's son, she had made him watch, in silence, as she crushed the heart of the woman who brought him into the world. That was not just an act of malice, it was a declaration of ownership, and my son's paralysis was his signature on the contract, sealing the transfer of his loyalty. The golden ballroom had turned into a cage, and I was the main attraction in a spectacle of cruelty. As the world around me began to spin slowly, my mind sought refuge in a safe place, my small kitchen in a working-class neighborhood of Miami, miles away from that sterile luxury. I remembered the smell of beans cooking on the stove, the warmth of the steam on my face as I ironed David's shirts so he would look impeccable for college. I remembered my hands, even back then, rough and tired, holding his, so soft and full of promise. I sacrificed my youth, my health, and my small dreams so he could have his. I sold my old car to pay for his books, worked on holidays to ensure he had the best study materials, and celebrated his victories with a simple piece of cake, but one made with a love that was worth more than all the champagne bubbling in that hall. Every sacrifice was a stone I used to build the bridge that led him away from me, to this very moment. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. I had built him up so he could be strong, yet there he was, weak and mute, broken by ambition. That contrast between the past of love and the present of abandonment gave me the clarity I needed. I was not meant to be there. With a calmness that surprised even myself, I felt the pain transform into a cold resolution. Slowly, I pushed my chair back. The scraping sound on the marble floor was like thunder in the awkward silence, an act of rebellion that no one expected. I stood up, and my knees protested, but my spine remained straight. I felt the stairs following me as if they were physical hands trying to push me back into my place of insignificance. I ignored them all. My focus was on the large wooden door at the back of the hall, my escape portal. I did not look at the main table. I did not give Amanda the satisfaction of seeing a tear, nor David the chance to see the damage his silence had caused. To me, at that moment, they had become just part of the expensive, soulless decor of that event. I began to walk, each step a silent affirmation of my own dignity. The path seemed endless, a gauntlet of whispers and sideways glances. I could smell the judgment in the air, the condescension, and the false pity. I was halfway to freedom when a figure moved with surprising speed, leaving the head table and placing himself directly in my path. He was an older man, with gray hair and a suit tailored with a discreet elegance that outshone all the ostentatious glitter around. His face was stern, and his blue eyes, incredibly piercing, looked at me not with pity, but with a kind of respect and a contained fury that, to my complete astonishment, was not directed at me. He raised a hand, not to touch me, but to ask me to stop, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The man before me, Mr. Beaumont, Amanda's father, did not move. His presence was a silent wall that prevented me from fleeing. But strangely, I did not feel threatened, but rather protected. In that instant when time seemed to freeze, my mind betrayed me, escaping from the opulence of that ballroom to the dusty simplicity of the streets of Fresno, California, where I raised David. I saw him as a little boy, running after a worn-out ball, with perpetually scraped knees and a smile that was the sun of my life. I remember coming home exhausted, after cleaning 3 different offices and still finding the strength to review his homework at the small kitchen table. The smell of cleaning, products on my clothes mixed with the smell of the simple dinner I prepared. Every penny saved was for him, for the brand-name sneakers he so desperately wanted so he wouldn't feel different from the other boys, for the encyclopedia he used until the pages fell out, for the college application fee that represented my entire life savings. Our bond was forged in sacrifice and a silent complicity. When he graduated, the first in our family to have a degree, he hugged me in the middle of the crowd and cried, saying that it was all because of me. That day, I believed that all my effort had built for him not just a future, but also an unshakable character. Little did I know that the character I was so proud of having molded would, in fact, be as malleable as clay in someone else's hands. The clay began to harden into a shape I didn't recognize the day David introduced me to Amanda. She was beautiful, polished, and came from a world of privilege I only saw in magazines. At first, I tried, with all my might, to like her, seeing her as living proof of my son's success. But the cracks in her courteous facade soon appeared. On her first visit to my modest apartment, her eyes scanned my furniture with a forced smile that did not reach her gaze. She praised my small and quaint home with the same tone one would use to describe a curious but dusty antique. David, who once loved the sofa where we watched old movies, now seemed ashamed of it. He began to call less, and visits became rare, formal events. He talked about dinners at country clubs, trips to Europe, and expensive wines, a foreign vocabulary that created a chasm between us. He was being assimilated into her world, and part of the assimilation process was, clearly, erasing the fingerprints of my world from him. The coldness settled in slowly, like a frost that first burns the most fragile leaves and then freezes the root. The warmth of my boy was being replaced by the calculated coldness of Amanda's man. The first, explicit humiliation came disguised as redecoration. One day, I came home to find Amanda and two of her friends in my apartment, with David watching passively from a corner. Amanda, with her authoritarian manner and the smile of someone performing a great act of charity, announced that she was going to gift me a new living room. The gift, however, required that everything of mine be thrown away. I tried to argue, explaining that the old, worn velvet armchair was where I rocked him when he had a fever, that the small wooden bookshelf had been the first piece of furniture I bought with my own money. That's when one of her friends laughed and said, "Oh, how sentimental. But darling, this is a breeding ground for dust mites," Amanda added, looking at me as if I were a stubborn child. "Sophia, don't be an obstacle. We are trying to give you a better, cleaner life." I searched David's eyes, pleading for help, for a single word that would validate my memories. He just looked away and said, his voice low and tense, "Mom, she's just trying to help. Let her do it. It's just a bunch of old junk." The word junk came out of his mouth and hit my heart like a stone. That afternoon, I watched my memories being piled in the hallway for the trash. And with them, the image of the son I thought I knew. He had not only allowed her to disrespect me in my own home, he had validated her cruelty in front of strangers. The second time was even more cutting because it involved the weight of money, the burden she made sure I felt. To celebrate a small raise David had received, they took me to dinner. I was happy, thinking it might be a glimpse of our old relationship. We went to an Italian restaurant, not too expensive, but elegant. I ordered the simplest dish on the menu, conscious of not being a burden. The conversation was superficial and tense, with me making most of the effort to keep things light. At the end, when the bill came, Amanda picked it up and examined it with an exaggerated sigh. Then she looked at David and said, in a tone loud enough for the next table to hear, "It's amazing how costs add up, isn't it? We have to think about our future, about investments. An extra mouth to feed really changes the financial equation." She smiled at me as if sharing a business joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was a price tag she was placing on my forehead. I was the extra mouth. I was the expense item on her life spreadsheet. David turned red but didn't say a word. In my defense, he simply took the bill from her hand, paid with his credit card, and changed the subject, talking about the traffic. That night, on the way home, the silence in the car was heavier than any words. I was no longer his mother. I was a financial liability, an inconvenient statistic in his quest for status. In the months leading up to the wedding, the isolation became complete. I was informed of the date and venue via a text message. I did not participate in choosing the dress, tasting the food, or planning the guest list. I was a peripheral figure, a social obligation they needed to fulfill. My loneliness was a dark, windowless room. I started having chest pains, and my blood pressure rose, but I kept it to myself. How could I speak of my weaknesses when I was already seen as a burden? I would hear them, on rare calls, talking about the important names who would be present, about the honeymoon in Monaco, about the bright future they were building, a future of which I was clearly not a part. My presence at the wedding, I realized too late, was not to honor me, but to serve as a contrast, to be the before in David's success story, a step he had tread upon and left behind. The public humiliation during the toast was not a spur-of-the-moment impulse from Amanda. It was a calculated act, the culmination of years of small cuts and devaluations designed to permanently put me in my place, that of a forgotten relic from a shameful past. And now, back in the blinding present of that ballroom, Mr. Beaumont stood before me, his eyes reflecting an understanding I had not found in my own son. He did not say a word to me. Instead, with a gesture of immense and unexpected kindness, he placed a firm but gentle hand on my shoulder and turned me to face the crowd and the stage. I felt a wave of strength coming from that touch. He did not hide me. He presented me. Then, he walked with determined, firm steps to the head table. The silence in the hall was now electric, charged with an almost unbearable tension. Amanda watched him with a mixture of shock and fury, her perfect face contorted into a mask of disbelief. David seemed to have shrunk inside his expensive suit. Mr. Beaumont reached the stage and, without hesitation, took the microphone from his own daughter's trembling hand. The sharp feedback from the microphone for a second broke the silence, making everyone flinch. He adjusted the height, and the sound of his calm, controlled breathing filled every corner of that hall. His eyes passed over Amanda, over David, and then landed on me, across the room, with an intensity that seemed to see into my soul. Then he opened his mouth, and I knew that whatever he said next would not be a whisper, but an earthquake. Mr. Beaumont's breath into the microphone was the last sound of calm before the storm. His eyes, which were still fixed on mine, shifted and locked onto his daughter, Amanda. The paternal love had vanished from his face, replaced by a disappointment so profound it looked like an open wound. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that silenced even thoughts. "Amanda," he began, and her name sounded like an accusation. "I have spent my entire life giving you everything money can buy in the hope that it would allow you to develop what it cannot: class, empathy, and a heart. I see now that I have failed spectacularly." Amanda's jaw dropped. The shock on her face was quickly replaced by a helpless fury. "The only shame I see in this room tonight, the only stain on our family, is your attitude," he continued, each word a hammer blow. "You dare to speak of level when your behavior is the lowest possible? You boast about your social standing, yet you publicly humiliate the woman whose sacrifices allowed the man beside you to have the education and opportunities to one day meet you." I watched everything as if from outside my body. These were the words I should have said myself, the feelings I had suffocated for years, and to hear them spoken by him, the patriarch of the family that so despised me, was a validation so powerful, so complete, that I felt something realign within me. It was my dignity, coming home. Then, Mr. Beaumont did something that changed everything. He raised his hand and pointed at me, not accusingly, but like a host revealing the true star of the show. "Look at this lady," he said, and his voice was now addressed to all the guests, to that entire universe of privilege. "Look at her closely. You see a simple dress. I see honor. You see calloused hands. I see the map of a life of honest work that built the character of the man my daughter married. I recognize dignity when I see it, because it was with that same dignity, coming from a family as humble as hers, that my late wife, your mother, Amanda, helped me build every penny that you now squander with such arrogance." A collective gasp swept through the hall. He had invoked the memory of his wife, the sacred matriarch of that family, and compared me to her. At that moment, he was not just defending me, he was consecrating me, elevating me to a position of honor that no one there would dare question. I felt the tears I had refused to cry out of humiliation well up in my eyes, but now they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. I stood a little taller, feeling the weight of years of shame finally lift from my shoulders. I was not the family shame. I was the silent foundation upon which all of this, somehow, had been built. And finally, someone saw it. With a terrible finality, Mr. Beaumont looked at his daughter one last time, then at my son, who was now weeping silently, his face in his hands. David's collapse was total. He was not the groom at a luxury wedding, but a lost boy caught between the mother he had betrayed and the powerful father-in-law who condemned him. "As for this event," Mr. Beaumont said, his voice low and sharp, "it is a farce. There is no celebration of love here, only a display of cruelty and ego. The party is over, at least for me." With that, he placed the microphone gently on the podium, and the dull thud of the device echoed like the sound of a judge's gavel. The spell was broken. Chaos began. The guests looked at each other, uncomfortable, and a loud murmur filled the room. I saw Amanda turn to David, her face red with rage, hissing words I couldn't hear but whose cruelty I could imagine. I saw people starting to get up, discreetly, eager to escape the scene of the social disaster of the year. Amanda's dream party had turned into her most public nightmare, and the architect of her humiliation was her own father. I, the supposed source of shame, was now the only person in the room who seemed to be at peace, an island of calm in the middle of the brewing social storm. Ignoring the pandemonium his words had caused, Mr. Beaumont descended from the stage and walked directly toward me. The crowd parted for him like the sea before Moses. He looked at no one, not his daughter, not his weeping son-in-law. His eyes were focused only on me. When he reached me, he stopped and, to the astonishment of everyone still watching, he offered me his arm, an old-school chivalrous gesture that was as powerful as his speech. "Mrs. Sophia," he said, his voice now soft and respectful, "allow me to escort you out of this lamentable place." There were no traces of my former hesitation. The woman who had entered that hall, hunched over and afraid, had vanished. In her place was a woman who had just been reminded of her own worth. I took his arm without hesitation, feeling the fine texture of his suit fabric under my fingers. As we turned and walked toward the exit, side by side, leaving behind a wedding in ruins and a son who would have to face the consequences of his cowardice, I felt a power I had never experienced. It was not the power of money, but the power of restored dignity, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that what I would do the next morning would not be an escape, but an act of foundation, the first brick in the construction of my new life. We would like to feel your presence at this very moment. Please write in the comments which city you are watching us from and what time it is there now. By doing this, we create a network of energy and support for this story, a reminder that we are not alone in our battles. Every comment is a point of light in our healing process. In the silent hotel corridor, the contrast with the chaos we had left behind was absolute. The air was cool and smelled of clean carpet. There, away from prying eyes, Mr. Beaumont turned to me, his face marked by a genuine sadness. "My lady," he said, his voice low and filled with sincerity, "what my daughter did to you tonight is unforgivable. She does not deserve you as family, and frankly, my money was not able to buy her a heart. I would like to offer you not only my deepest apologies, but a place of honor. My late wife, of whose dignity you remind me, would have adored you." His words were a balm on wounds I didn't even know were still open. Before I could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. It was David. His face was swollen and red, his designer suit wrinkled, the image of perfection completely undone. He stopped before me, his chest heaving, and the tears he had not shed in the ballroom now flowed freely. "Mom," he sobbed, the word coming out torn. "Mom, forgive me. I was a coward. I was weak and stupid. I choose you." And then, to my shock and Mr. Beaumont's, my son fell to his knees on the expensive hotel floor, clinging to my hand like a lost child. I felt a tremor run through my body, a wave of motherly love mixed with a new, unshakable clarity. I knelt with difficulty and hugged him, but it was not an embrace of absolution. It was an embrace of farewell to the woman I used to be. I loved him, but I would no longer belong to him. I looked over his shoulder at Mr. Beaumont and, with a slight nod, silently accepted his offer. In the following week, my life changed in a way I could never have imagined. Mr. Beaumont, a man of his word and of action, took care of everything. He set me up in a small but charming house in a quiet community in Key Biscayne, a place surrounded by trees and the distant sound of the sea. The first morning I woke up there, the sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the freshly painted soft, yellow walls. There was no smell of mildew from my old apartment, no feeling of walls that held memories of loneliness. There was only peace. I decided to sell my old apartment and everything in it. I hired a company to empty it, as I didn't have the courage to go back myself. It wasn't about the money. which I used to open a savings account for any eventuality, but about the symbolic act of closing one door so that another could open. The old armchair, the small bookshelf, the sofa where David grew up, all gone. I was dismantling the shrine I had built for him, because I finally understood that I could not live in a museum to a love that had almost destroyed me. The new house was simple, furnished with comfortable pieces that Mr. Beaumont himself helped me choose. For the first time in decades, I was not taking care of someone else's house or maintaining a home for my son. I was building a refuge for myself. The consequences for Amanda and David were swift and silent, devoid of any revenge on my part. The universe, or perhaps the social justice of Miami, took care of it. The wedding, of course, was annulled. The story of Mr. Beaumont's speech spread like wildfire through high society, but the narrative that took hold was not that of the poor mother-in-law, but that of the cruel heiress publicly and emotionally disowned by her own father. Amanda became a pariah. Her friends stopped answering her calls, and invitations to events dried up. Her greatest weapon, social status, had been taken from her by the only person who could do it. David, for his part, lost everything in a single day. He lost his wealthy fiancée, the promising future in one of his father-in-law's companies, and most importantly, he lost himself. Without Amanda's shine to guide him, he was forced to face the emptiness of his own choices. He moved back to a small, impersonal rented apartment and had to face the silent contempt of colleagues who knew the story. His downfall was not dramatic, with shouts and accusations. It was a silent implosion, the natural result of building a life on a foundation of shame and cowardice. Justice, I discovered, is not always thunder. Sometimes, it is just the deafening echo of your own bad choices in an empty room. My new purpose arrived in the form of a foundation Mr. Beaumont had created in his late wife's name, dedicated to supporting elderly people in emotionally and financially vulnerable situations. He invited me not to be a benefactor or a director, but to be something much more important, a counselor. My job was simply to sit and listen. I began to go to the community center every day, sharing coffee and stories with men and women who, like me, had often felt invisible to their own families and to the world. I used my life of sacrifices not as a story of sadness, but as a credential of empathy. I heard stories of abandonment far worse than my own, and offered not solutions, but the dignity of attentive listening. I discovered a strength in my ability to absorb the pain of others and transform it into understanding. The woman who had been silenced for so long now used silence to heal. The contrast was stark. I had spent my entire life serving a single son who discarded me, and now I found immense joy in serving a community of strangers who saw me as an equal, as a source of wisdom and comfort. About 6 months later, David appeared at the foundation's door. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and he wore simple clothes. He didn't ask to speak to me. He asked for a job, any job. He started in the kitchen, washing dishes, the same work I had done for years to support him. He never mentioned his degree or his old job. He just worked, in silence, day after day. I watched him from a distance, seeing him serve lunch to the elderly, clean the tables, treating everyone with a humility I had never seen in him. He wasn't doing it to impress me. He was doing penance. He was, perhaps for the first time, finding value in the kind of work he had always despised. One day we met in the center's garden. He was watering the flowers. We didn't talk about the past. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a silent remorse, and said, "The gardenias are beautiful this year." I smiled, a genuine smile. The path to forgiveness would be long, but for the first time, I saw the boy I raised returning. Today, I do not have the luxury my son once desperately chased, but I have a home filled with peace, a purpose that fills my soul, and most importantly, I have regained my self-respect, and that, I have learned, is the only wealth that no one, ever again, can take from me. Have you ever done a kind gesture that changed someone's life? Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. 3 years have passed since that night that redefined my world. Today, the Florida sun shines on the inauguration of the new Sophia Beaumont Center for Community and Dignity, a project that has grown beyond all our dreams. I am standing on a small stage, no longer hidden in a corner, but at the center of a celebration of life. The dress I am wearing today is simple, but I bought it in a store, and its blue color reflects the serenity I have finally found. My posture is erect, not out of pride, but because I no longer carry the weight of shame. Beside me, Mr. Beaumont, whom I now call Arthur, is more than a benefactor. He is the brother life gave me late. He looks at me with an affection that transcends friendship. My eyes sweep the small, happy crowd before me and find my son, David. He is not on the stage, nor in the front row. He is at the back, helping to serve lemonade, his face flushed from the sun, and a genuine smile I haven't seen since his childhood. Our eyes meet, and he raises his glass in a silent toast. In that gesture, there is a universe of forgiveness, redemption, and a love rebuilt on much stronger foundations, mutual respect. My speech ends, and I am embraced not by socialites, but by women and men whose hands are as marked by life as mine. A lady named Elena pulls me close and whispers a joke, and I let out a loud, free laugh, a sound that is now part of who I am. Later, for an instant, I see my reflection in the glass of the center's entrance door. The woman staring back has gray hair and the same wrinkles, but her eyes shine with a purpose that pain could not extinguish. It took me 70 years to truly see myself, to see beyond the mother, the widow, the cleaning lady. But today, finally, I see the woman I have become. And for the first time in my life, I know that she is more than enough.